Hey everyone, it's Scott from Heroic Studios Gaming. How you doing? Coming with you with another video. Today I'm going to be talking about the Hunter the Reckoning video games. The reason I'm talking about Hunter the Reckoning video games is because I vaguely remembered what was going on in them, and then I decided to kind of look it up and realize that they're actually quite short games. In fact, you could probably finish them off in like an evening of gaming. And that's kind of how I remembered it with my friends, so I thought, why the heck not? I remember enough of the game. And then I just kept looking into it and was like, oh, okay, there's like a whole story going on. But let's talk about it. So Hunter the Reckoning video games, there was 3 of them. The first one came out in 2002, and then the second and third ones both came out in 2003, but one was on PlayStation 2 and the other one was on Xbox. The 2 games that followed kind of followed the original storyline, but they would took place different time periods afterwards. So you kind of needed to play the first game, but you really didn't need to. They gave you enough of what happened in the first game in both of those games to be able to play it. And I remember playing the PlayStation 2 version. That was the version because we had a PlayStation 2 with my friends and I, so we rented it from Blockbuster and we went and played it and we got most of the way through it. We didn't quite finish it, but that's because of some reasons that I'll explain a little bit later. But I didn't play the first game, but it gave us enough of a synopsis of what happened in the first game to be able to recognize that we were basically playing a similar game. But essentially, the first one had a plot, and then there was a solution to that plot. And then the second one, which was Wayward, which was the one that was on the PlayStation 2, took place a year later, where there was sort of a revisit to the town because of new stuff that had happened, but kind of unrelated to the first one, kind of not. There's kind of a link there. But there's some reoccurring characters, and then there's some there's reoccurring NPCs and PCs. And then the third one, which is called Redeemer on the Xbox, that actually took place 10 years after the original game, and so the storylines didn't quite matter as much. There's a little girl that you rescued that you're supposed to. It's part of the plot of rescuing her as like a whole mission in the first game that is now grown up, and she is like, hey, there's some stuff going on back in this town, so you should come back and finish dealing with this town of supernatural, and so therefore you go back and deal with it. So you can honestly play the games individually, or you can play them in a chain, but it's not required. You don't have to play Wayward to play Redeemer, and you don't have to play the first game to play Wayward, and you don't have to play the first game to play Redeemer. So they just kind of are games that exist. But let's talk about them. They were, like I said, they came out in 2002, then 2003 and 3. They were both made by High Voltage Studios, which was a relatively unknown game company, and they both were sort of pushed by White Wolf Publishing to be part of the World of Darkness games. That's what they wanted to do, and so that's what the idea was, but that is not what we got. Anyone familiar with the World of Darkness got a game that was not the World of Darkness. They just got a game that kind of helped the World of Darkness, but not really. The only key elements to it is that as a hunter, you were awakened at an event that happened, and you were sort of given sort of the message that the veil was rended from your eyes, and you could see monsters as they really were, but only you could see them that way. And then you were thus imbued, and you knew what was going on. And if you don't understand any of that, that's fine. Go watch my video where I talk about Hunter and Hunter the Reckoning, where I combine the two, which I will be making a little bit later in the month. But anyway, so you become imbued, and you are given some powers, and you're basically sent off to save the world, essentially. And that's the idea. In Wayward, which I play with my friends, you're just called back to deal with what you kind of left behind in the first game. So, without further ado, wham! There's some of Wayward. So the problem with the Hunter the Reckoning games is that they were a sort of top-down, semi-isometric, not really isometric, but semi-isometric, I guess not isometric at all. But anyway, a top-down view, hack-and-slash games. You were essentially running around, and everything you fought could be killed with a shotgun or a blade, and everyone had a weapon, like a projectile weapon and a blade. The only thing was that you ran out of bullets, and so there were these sort of weird objectives. So the reason why my friends and I never finished is we reached a point in the game where you kind of get through the horde of dudes, and then you eventually are like in sort of a closet, sort of rearming and refilling your life points and getting ready to go back out and do like kind of the end game of the game. And we Well, we were out of bullets and we were out of lives, and we didn't really know what to do because the game doesn't really give you extra lives. Well, it does, but not as like a buff before like a boss fight, right? So we just didn't have it. And each time we actually tried to go out and fight, we would die. And then we would just have to restart the game from our last save point in our which used to be on a memory card. And so we would restart the last save point, which was back in that room, and then so on, right? And then we tried going back to a further save point because we were smart enough to have like multiple save points. We tried to go back to a further save point, and we just kind of ended up in the same place. But this game, so there's lots of problems with the game. First off, it doesn't tell you anything about the world of darkness. You are some kind of imbued thing, and you're killing stuff. It's essentially Resident Evil on like a mass scale. So what the game does is that you're fighting low-level monsters. You're fighting. There are higher level monsters, but you start off fighting just like hordes upon hordes upon hordes upon hordes of zombies, and then they sort of add vampires who are essentially the same kind of thing, but with like they're faster and they can do more things and they're smarter. And then you fight, more and bigger and faster monsters until eventually you're just kind of fighting all kinds of stuff. You fight like werewolves and you fight animated things in the prison, and you just kind of deal with all kinds of supernatural monstery things. That's the whole game. So there's not really like what is the world of darkness as a hunter? What does that mean for me? There's no stalking your prey. There's just this semi-apocalyptic supernatural apocalypse sort of happening, and this town has like a rift open in it, and there's just a bunch of supernatural things. It's essentially Resident Evil, right? Like there's just these hordes upon hordes of enemies that you got to chop down and kill. And they just keep coming. And the game also spawns them directly in front of you. So, like, that road looks clear, right? But you see that it just spawned a thing. It spawned another thing. Spawned another thing. That's what it does. The whole game is, like, you're trying to clear areas, and they just keep spawning. And they'll just keep spawning. And sometimes annoyingly spawn directly in your path. And so, like, you'll be doing a thing or you'll be running, and it'll just suddenly there'll be a monster there or whatever. Yeah, and that's sort of a problem. Plus, the gameplay, like the controls on the game, are a little tricky, and so like if you smashed buttons, which you were inevitably doing because you were just fighting hordes upon hordes upon hordes of zombies, you would just essentially keep going past the whatever you were trying to attack, and you would just be doing stuff. So, this game, as you can see here, I stole this from the internet. This person showing the game off had to skip points. At some points because they were like the game just becomes a slog for lots of it. And like grinding is fine, but it becomes a slog. And with the thing where you have to select your weapons, you can only like the one thing about this game that was kind of tricky was that you could only like refresh yourself with your weapons and things if you were at a save location, like a safe house or whatever, and then you could access the computer, which allowed you to access the HunterNet, which gave you the information. Which apparently in the first game, it just the HunterNet just pops up whenever it's relevant. In this case, you had to go to a save point to like read through emails and things and read part of the story that you weren't getting. And you had unlimited ammo for your sidearm. But in this game, you have limited ammo on your sidearm, which is kind of where we got stuck because all of our sidearms, which is your primary projectile weapon, which is weak, but at least it's there, did not have unlimited ammo, and we run out. But you're essentially rolling around trying to find bigger and better weapons while you fight more and more stronger monsters, and that's the whole game, is you run around doing that, and then occasionally you reach these sort of mission checkpoints where you get some cutscenes, which were cool because they had voice acting, which was nice, and that was what we did. So we ended up following the storyline pretty well. There's like a cult of witches, and they were like raising the dead, essentially, and they were being helped by, or kind of helped by, sort of, a wraith and a risen ghost thing inhabiting a body that was his own, apparently, who was one of the primary bad guys, and apparently the trigger point for the hunters back in the first game. His name was Carpenter, and he was supposedly a serial killer or whatever, and at his execution, like that's what the veil was rent. Apparently he's some kind of supernatural thing. It says he's a wraith in a lot of like the lore for the game, but in the actual game itself, he turns into a werewolf each time you fight him. So like, I think he's a werewolf? I'm not sure, but I guess he does have spirit powers, which kind of puts him in that sort of weird territory. I am Not entirely sure. I've never actually played Wraith, but if Wraith has the ability to transform into different monsters, that's interesting. Okay. But this, I guess as far as video games go, this would be a decent entry into the video game world for the World of Darkness. But they chose, like I said, they chose some kind of lesser-known company, and I think it has a lot to do with money, like budget-wise. Like, they wanted to jump in, and they didn't want to necessarily jump in with, like, something big. And you get things like EA Games, who's, like, a big-name company, but they make sort of terrible games anyway. But yeah, in this scene, as you can see here, there's animated stuff. It's just animated stuff. So this game isn't really, like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense as far as the World of Darkness storyline is concerned. You're just kind of smashing and killing things. It's kind of like the way that Diablo is. It's basically that. It's just a Diablo clone. But instead of fighting skeletons and goblins and stuff, you're fighting zombies and eventually vampires. And the only way you tell what a vampire is that they don't look like a zombie, essentially. They look like people. They wear, like, leather, and they wear, like, jeans and stuff, and then they, like, move at you real fast, and that's how you know they're a vampire. But other than that, like, they all kind of look the same, and you're kind of just fighting a lot of the same. Until you get to, like, a thing like this animated, whatever the hell this is, electric chair kind of business. Or you face off with, like, a werewolf or one of the other massive creatures that usually surround boss fights. And boss fights were, by the way, really, really hard, because it was like, here's a boss, they have these cool special powers, but they're also going to get surrounded by, like, 80 million of these instantly spawning zombies and stuff. Because, and this is why, the game allowed for co-op modes, and depending on the version you're playing, like on the Xbox, you could have 4 controllers, so there could be 4 players. For the PlayStation 2, there was only 2 controllers, so you could have 2 players. The original game, I guess, could have been on GameCube, and GameCube could allow for 4 players. It could co-op mode where you had multiple players on the screen. So the game was designed for having multiple players. In fact, the game is much easier when you play it with multiple people, because one of them could be smashing around all the zombies while the other one is killing the main boss guy. And so that is how my friends and I played it, right? We rented it, and then we would all just kind of, all 4 of us were hanging out in the living room playing the game all night. So we would just trade off, because you can trade off characters, and so we would trade off who was playing during a certain time. We'd be like, okay, an hour, and now it's your turn. An hour, it's your turn, that kind of thing. And you can, whenever you get to a safe house, you can swap out the characters that are playing, so you don't have to keep playing the same hunters the whole time, and you can level them up and stuff. And so we would just swap out. So, like, I had my favorite, which was Father Cortez, and then there was, other people had their other favorites, and then you just kind of rolled around and you fought. The way that you gained life in this game was to save innocents. So if you saved innocent, you got an extra life, and then you would die, because inevitably you would die, especially during boss fights. And then you just hit start, and you would, get a new life, and you would keep going. And that was a really interesting way to play the game, especially when you have 2 players. But otherwise, I give this game is like a 1 thumb, because there you go. Because it's actually kind of engaging. It's just not, like, really, there's not really a story. It's not really a World of Darkness game. It's just a hack and slash game. And you're kind of, like, just doing a bunch of stuff. I'm not going to give it a 2nd thumb, because it is a slog. It is kind of a hard game to get through. But, as far as, like, introducing the world to the Hunter the Reckoning system, it was a thing. Like, to be honest, I didn't know that Hunter the Reckoning existed. I was unaware of it, though I was aware of Vampire. I was unaware of this Hunter the Reckoning, like, at all, except for this game entry, right? I didn't know it existed. And so this game was the sort of jumping point for me to later recognize Hunter as a World of Darkness product. But I did know when I started playing this, I was like, okay, this is part of that whole thing. And I thought Hunter the Reckoning was literally just a video game that had been created based on the World of Darkness. I didn't know that it was a tabletop game prior to that point. But, I just kind of thought, okay, this is in that same world as, like, the vampire stuff. And then I was very disappointed to, like, the vampire clans and things didn't matter. Vampires were just yet more spawning monsters that appear out of nowhere and are indistinguishable from the other monsters, except that they do slightly different things. And that's it. So anyway, 1 thumb for this game, and now you get to see gameplay of it, and now you know basically the whole story. I mean, I'll give you the whole story real short, because this is already a long video, but a real short story. First game, your characters wake up as hunters, and then you close off a prison where there's, like, a bunch of supernatural power, and then, like, a year later, a rave some people break in to have a rave on the rooftop, and that awakens the spirits, and all of a sudden the town is being flooded with these things. You have to then deal with all of that, and actually deal with what you left behind. then stop that, close the rift, and whatever. Then a year after that, you're called back again because two hunters were noticing some strange things, and then they discover that a cult has like broken back into the penitentiary and started opening the rift again. And so these two hunters are like, hey, we need help out here. And you show up to find out that they've already sort of lost and the cult has kidnapped them. You rescue one, and then that joins your party, and you have a fifth like character to choose from and a new creed type for your character, and then for characters in your party. And then that character sort of goes off on their own near the end, and then you end up like sort of fighting the cult and dealing with them as the cult's like sacrifice or whatever. Anyway, you have to stop the cults, and then 10 years later with Redeemer, you're sort of same deal. Like there's like a rift, and everything goes to haywire again. And there's not a rift created by a cult or anything. It's like a company that is run by vampires or something that is doing some business, and they're sort of using the rift as like a supernatural nexus point for power. And it's a lot of the same of hacking and slashing while you eventually get inside the company and you shut down their riftiness. And that's the whole storyline. So now you know the whole storyline of the Hunter the Reckoning game lines, and then you have this recurring Wraith character named Carpenter who shows up a bunch, and you fight him a few times, but he never actually dies because apparently Wraiths are immortal. I don't know. But that's the whole thing. So that's it. So that's the storyline. So that is Hunter the Reckoning in a nutshell. And like I said, I give it one thumb up. I only played the one, so I can't say that the others are any good or worse. But I know that on Metacritic they all kind of have mixed reviews, and so therefore I assume that my one thumb is pretty much what you're gonna get for those games. If you have a chance to play them, fine, but you can't get them on Steam or anything. Like you basically have to have an Xbox or a PlayStation or an emulator of those kinds to play these games, and that's it. That's all you got. So that's it. I will then let you guys get back to your normal business, and thanks for taking your time to watch this video where I talk about these things. I will see you in the future at some point. Have a good day.